I'm absolutely terrified of snakes, and I just found out my girlfriend has a pet snake and I don't want to hurt her feelings, so I backed out of her apartment, and here I am. This is not something to be necessarily ashamed of. The first step is wanting that to change, and it sounds like that is something you want to change, so I think that's great. Hi, my name's Rocky Parker. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Biology here at Madison University, and today I'm gonna be answering your snake questions from the internet. What is the smallest snake species in the world? Well, the smallest snake species in the world is a group of snakes called thread snakes. These snakes are really teeny tiny. You would probably see them and not even know that they're snake. They could coil up on top of a dime. That's how small they are. These snakes are really, really interesting because we actually don't know much about them. Like a lot of snake species, they're really just understudied. If you want to go down a Google hole, you can look up the Barbados thread snake, and these snakes are really cute. They're teeny tiny. That'll take you on a really awesome trek through understanding snake biodiversity. How do I get rid of my huge fear of snakes? I'm absolutely terrified of snakes. You're not alone. And I just found out my girlfriend has a pet snake and I don't want to hurt her feelings, so I backed out of her apartment, and here I am. Like I said, you're not the only person to ever be afraid of snakes, especially snakes that people have as pets. One of the things that a lot of people do to address their fear of snakes is you can actually go to forms of therapy to manage your ophidiophobia. That's the technical word for fear of snakes. Some people have really debilitating fears of snakes where they couldn't even be in the room with the snake that's in this cage right next to me. Even though this is a completely harmless garter snake, a snake you could easily pick up, and the snake would only be curious as you held it. But these fears are based in our primitive instinct to be afraid of snakes, which is something primates, like humans, have evolved as a trait. So if anything, you're differently evolved than your girlfriend in terms of your accentuated fear compared to theirs. This is not something to be necessarily ashamed of, as long as you don't harm snakes because of the fear. And this is something we see a lot of in people who have severe fear of snakes, is they go out of their way to kill them regardless of the threat that those snakes actually pose to them. So that's the only time that I would say that a human's fear of these animals leads to the animal's demise for no reason. Perhaps your girlfriend and you could look for resources in your area where maybe there's a therapist you could go and see to help work on your fear of snakes, because I'm sure that this is something that gets in the way of your relationship. The first step is wanting that to change, and it sounds like that is something you want to change. So I think that's great. Has anybody ever seen a snake without a tongue? Do they exist? I love this question because one of the things that fascinates me about snakes is the way that they navigate their sensory world. And their tongue is that access point for them. That's what they use their tongue for. It's actually an odor transfer device. It goes out in the environment, it samples stuff, and then it brings it back into the mouth so that the snakes can react to whatever's out in the environment. There are some snakes, individuals, not whole species, where they have developmental dysformity, where the tongue tines don't form. And so instead they end up with like club-like tongue instead of one that's forked. And if a snake completely lacked a tongue, how it recognized food in its environment, mates, etc., would be severely compromised, and that snake probably doesn't have a good chance of survival. So they do exist, they're super rare. Think about how many people are likely born without tongues. It would be the same level of likelihood, I would say. Wait. Do snakes feel pain when they shed their skin? No, it's probably the opposite. There's two parts here. The first is the idea that reptiles in general have the ability to sense pain in the way that mammals do. We know that that part of the reptile brain is much more underdeveloped than it is in mammals, and so their degree to which they feel or experience pain is probably a lot more reduced than ours. We always talk about shedding the skin as the feeling that you probably get whenever you take off something really, really tight. Because what's happening whenever snakes are shedding their skin is they're growing. They're actually getting a little bit bigger, and so what'll happen is they shed that exterior skin, which is a little bit too small for them at this point, and now they have a newer skin that's a little bit bigger. Snakes are really interesting when they start to shed. If you hold them and they start working their bodies out of this old skin, they take their time and it's very slow and methodical. And so if anything, I would say that it's probably relaxing to them. But again, pleasure centers, nociceptive, or pain centers, this is very difficult to answer. And I would say at the very least, it's not painful to them. How do snakes move and climb so fast despite having no legs? This is an awesome question. The thing that's really fascinating about snakes that I learned as an undergraduate, which is really cool, is that they have all of these different ways that they can move their bodies. The thing that you're most often seeing whenever you see a snake move is what we call serpentina, the fact that the snake moves its body in this S-like shape. You've probably heard of sidewinding, but you probably didn't know that sidewinding is actually a lateral undulation of the body, but sort of perpendicular to the movement of travel. So what they're doing is they're only touching the bottom edge of their body onto the sand to keep their body raised up off the sand, and it's a lot faster, which is really cool. And then other things like concertina motion, where the snake will, think of a really large boa constrictor, right? It'll stick its head forward and extend, put its head down, and then pull its body forward as well, and sort of a, extend, crunch the body, extend, crunch the body. I would encourage you to look up brown tree snake lasso behavior. Very recently, some researchers studying an invasive species of snake on Guam called the brown tree snake found out that brown tree snakes have this unique locomotory ability where they can take their body, wrap it around a cylindrical object like a tree trunk, and use that lasso shape to shimmy their way up a cylindrical object, which that just blows my mind. So snakes are just really cool, especially for the way that they move. How many snake species are venomous across the world? This is a great question. It's really difficult to answer. How many snake species are there in the world? We think right now there's somewhere around 3,500, but that's probably a lower estimate. I think that there's somewhere around 600 of those 3,500 species are venomous. That's like 1 out of 6, 1 out of 5, somewhere around there. Venomous is a really interesting word. Venomous is determined by what you bite, not necessarily whether or not you possess venom per se. My example here is brown tree snakes. For the longest time, brown tree snake saliva was studied as a venom, but using mammals. And what would happen is you could treat mice with saliva from a brown tree snake, but it wouldn't actually hurt the mouse. And yet, these animals were called venomous, and it's like, well, maybe we need to reclassify them. And then people actually looked at other species with this venom. And what they found was that birds are really susceptible to the saliva of brown tree snakes. And so brown tree snakes are actually venomous to birds specifically. And that's why rattlesnakes, for example, are all venomous, because they're venomous to mammals. They've evolved to specialize on mammalian prey, which is why if a person gets bitten by a rattlesnake, it's a big deal. A person gets bitten by a brown tree snake, you can put a Band-Aid and you'll be all right. Did this snake just play dead? And yes, it did. Lots of species of snakes do what we call death feigning. And what the snake does is it turns over, it gapes its mouth, and it sticks its tongue out. And it looks like it's dead. So you've probably heard of playing possum, that, possums, whenever they get startled, will act like they're dead. They roll over, they gape their mouth. Snakes do the same thing. This is sort of a snake's last resort, especially if they're not venomous. I have tried to scare you away to prevent you from possibly eating me. I'm already dead. You don't want to eat me. That's basically what they're trying to communicate. The most famous example are hognose snakes. You want to see a real drama queen, look at a hognose snake. Which species of snake is most aggressive to humans? I would say none of them. I always say that snakes are the introverts of the animal world, especially among vertebrates. Snakes don't want anything to do with people, and they prefer it that way, which is why whenever snakes get confronted by people, so imagine a rattlesnake is just sitting on a hiking trail, minding its business, getting some sun, and then a hiker comes along and moves it with a stick, that's obviously going to be a problem for the snake, right? Whereas the hiker is viewing it as, oh, that snake's being aggressive. This snake has evolved to keep people at a distance, right? And people lose sight of the animal's side of this, which I think is really important. So again, snakes are basically just all introverts. They don't want anything to do with you. One of the things that's really important about snakes is that they play vital roles in ecosystems. So I always tell people, snakes are good for the environment, and so be good to snakes.